April 2020. We are living history right now. Anyway, welcome to this part 2 of our history of prehistory. If you remember well, last time we stopped in 1862, and that is when things get really interesting. Let's have a closer look at the characters of Lartet and Christie, two friends passionate with paleontology and archaeology. It's a rock containing flint tools and bone fragments found at an antique shop in Paris that will drive them straight to Dordogne, where they will excavate in several places for several years, especially in La Madeleine. (1864) Discovery of the undeniable proof that men and long-extinct mammals were contemporary. A fragment of mammoth ivory engraved with the figure of a mammoth. Not only was it carved on a mammoth part, but if it isn't proof enough, only a man who has seen a living mammoth would have been able to represent it so accurately. We finally hold the element that is going to annihilate all of the last remaining resistance to the notion of ancient man. Oh, no. One small community still holds out stubbornly against the progress. For example, Lucien d'Arville wrote in 1893 that the artists of this work could only have been early persecuted Christians who were using this drawing as a coded sign of recognition with each other, like in the catacombs of Rome. And that in this case, the mammoth was a symbolic representation of Behemoth from Genesis.
Et l'ivoire de mammouth, on en fait quoi?
But anyway, generally speaking, things have changed at that point, and this incredible outcrop of La Madeleine will continue to uncover its treasures throughout history and during 120 years. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Lartet and Christie will continue to excavate around Les Aisy, in Logerie Haute, Logerie Basse, and Le Moustier, and they are going to find a very important amount of specific lithic industry, but we'll get back to that later. In any case, this mammoth carving will be presented at the 1867 World Fair in Paris, alongside Boucher de Perthes' biface, which shows the ever-growing interest of the public for that discipline. Meanwhile, in Belgium, Édouard Dupont was excavating in La Nolette cavern and found an archaic human jaw. Found together with mammoth and woolly rhino fossils, but mostly lying underneath old stalagmites, which proved by geology the ancient age of this human fossil. Therefore, as Mortillier would point it out, quote, "Of all the human remains ever found, La Nolette's jaw is the most undeniably authentic and the most ancient. It, without a doubt, belongs to the Mammoth Age." (1868) Creation of the Museum of National Antiquities, where antediluvian flints were exhibited. In the same year, the prehistoric community is mourning the loss of its father, Boucher de Perthes. But an incredible discovery would appease the egos that were wounded by the affiliation to Neanderthal. Indeed, during the construction of a railway track in Les Aisy, 5 years later, but we really wanted to use this image. So, during the roadworks underneath what was called the Cro-Magnon rock in Les Aisy, Cro for hole in the ancient local dialect, and Magnon presumably the name of the ancient landlord.
Heureusement qu'il s'appelait pas Codille ou Nambour.
So they uncovered a ditch in which there were numerous human bones as well as tools in flint and seashells. Édouard Lartet's son, Louis, will be in charge of the excavation. It will turn out to be 5 different people, including a woman and a child, and the ditch was apparently a grave. After a first analysis, the bones were dated from the origination period, or the age of the bear. Turns out they weren't totally exact, because the bones date approximately from 20,000 years BP, which is the Gravation. Yet, their anatomy is similar to ours. That's a first. A very ancient man, but anatomically modern. It's the Homo sapiens. But given the huge success of the discovery and its worldwide spreading, the term man of Cro-Magnon will stick for a long time, and it will become the generic term for a prehistoric modern man. And it is a bummer, because many generations will mistakenly assume that Cro-Magnon isn't us, but it really is. Now, at that point, these human remains were no longer doubted to be ancient. On the contrary, they were pretty well received by the scientific community, who was thrilled to claim a more prestigious lineage. Indeed, there was our ancestor. Wasn't he more gracious than Neanderthal? But it raised many questions at that point. Was Neanderthal still our ancestor, older than Cro-Magnon? Was he another race? Did we ever meet? Or maybe, because we are obviously smarter and superior, maybe we annihilated them? So many questions that portray the misconceptions of a period that was at the dawn of the prehistoric research and a certain political agenda. We are on the verge of a war against Prussia, and our relationships with our Germanic neighbors weren't ideal. Indeed, it was seducing to believe that Neanderthal was the Germans' ancestor, rough and brutal, whereas Cro-Magnon, slim, elegant, was the French ancestor. Although it sounds shocking nowadays, let's not forget that in this period, people were still reading Gobineau's book, Essay on the Inequality of the Races. Yikes. The notion of the missing link appears for the first time in 1862 with the analysis of the Gibraltar skull by Hugh Falconer. In fact, shortly after Darwin's theory, since it was already unpleasant to accept any parentage with apes, then at least it was reassuring to believe that men were the pinnacle of a lineage in constant bettering. It's a misunderstanding of Darwin's theory, yet it keeps existing in the collective subconscious even in the 21st century. And yet, this notion has been so important that some people went as far as fabricating one. In 1912, Charles Dawson, British lawyer, anthropology and geology enthusiast, discovers in a quarry very promising human remains, together with fossils of hippos and what looked like elephants near Piltdown. He contacts Arthur Smith Woodward, paleontologist and curator in the Museum of Natural History in London. Their discovery is amazing. Fragments of a human modern skull associated with an ape-like jaw. Yet, the molar teeth in this jaw presented signs of wear, which were characteristic of human but not of apes. In this period, the only dating technique they had without the archaeological context was the comparison with the other fossils around. In this case, the latter were obviously old, genuinely old, and they had the same visible wear. In order to present this finding in the museum, Woodward patches together the top of the skull and the jaw with modeling clay. The public exhibition is sensational. Missing link has been found, and this time it's not in Germany or France, but in the UK. And to top that, he looks better than Neanderthal. It's no wonder that this discovery met some skepticism, including in France and in the US. And even though the French skepticism can pass for nationalism at that point, let's not forget that a few years later, Raymond Dart, an Australian paleontologist, will find in South Africa a specimen that he will name Australopithecus, monkey of the south, and that this one will present the opposite characteristics: a human-like jaw, for an ape-like skull. Still in the 20s, the German doctor Weidenreich, who examined the man of Piltdown, said that to him, they were the skull of a man and an orangutan's jaw. He was exactly right. But it took until 1953 and the fluorine dating to once and for all prove the fraud. The man wasn't old enough to be a missing link, and it was proven that he was not in the slightest as old as the bones around. Furthermore, it was proven that the skull and jaw had been immersed in dichromate to simulate age, and that the teeth had been filed. Finally, in 1959, with the apparition of carbon dating, the man of Piltdown will be buried forever, because it will be proven that the skull is only medieval. The fraud had lasted for 41 years, and so far the culprits have never been clearly identified. Of course, there are a certain number of suspects more or less reliable, and among this list figures Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who took an enthusiastic part in the spreading of the affair at the time. And it was just before the release of his book, The Lost World. In my opinion, he's not a serious suspect. I believe he really bought it because he was thirsty for enchantment and extraordinaire, because he was himself the victim of the fraud of the Cottingley fairies in his time. An interesting story that demonstrates that, of course, scientific advances are never neutral, and that they always have a lot to do with the political and ideological context of their time, and that no manipulation or lie can resist forever against the curiosity and the critical mind of the international scientific community. To get back to our 19th century, Gabriel de Mortillet, geologist and prehistorian, will revise in 1869 the chronology by Lartet with the new knowledge he had acquired. In order to make it more accurate, he will base it on the stratigraphy and the tools typology. And he will give the various prehistoric cultures the name of the locations where they were first found. Even though he has made some mistakes that will be corrected over time, globally his chronology is still valid nowadays. So it isn't over. Still, a lot of great findings are yet to be made. Stay with us if you want to keep exploring the depth of the Earth. In the next video, we will talk some more about the 20th century and the discovery of the first caves in the Dordogne. See you next time. Bye-bye. 1864. Discovery of the undeniable proof that men and long extinct Putain! 1864. Discovery... Attends. Discovery of the undeniable proof. Fuck. I believe he really bought it because